Hi everyone, this is Ricky Spencer and welcome to another of our Voices Sociology of Media series for 2023. Today we are going to deep dive into an area of intersectional research, which is kind of developing. And we're going to be speaking with someone called Georgie Yovanovic. And Georgie is a trans-intersex femme person identifying. She does a lot of community work. She is a community educator for Housing for the Aged Action Group. She's also a advisory member and a member of Transfemme, which is a community organisation that looks for the experiences of trans women and women who date cisgendered men, and exploring the area of violence towards that community. Georgie comes from a background. She has done many things in her life. She has been a board member for the Zoe Belle Collective. She has also worked in advocate for Sistergals and Brotherboys in Alice Springs, Northern Territory. She is also a member of Intersex Human Rights Association and was a working member of the Darlington Statement for ACON LGBTIQ Aged Care Project, National LGBTIQ Health Alliance for the Mental Health Project, Northern Territory Aids, Hepatitis, Cancer and Disability Services. And I wanted to quickly mention this because for so long, even within the LGBTIQ community, the experiences of trans intersex women is very much limited, unknown. And we are very privileged to have Georgie come to us today and to really unpack some of the misinformation and some of the ways forward that for those of you who are listening and working in the research of aged care, housing, LGBTIQ representation and disability services, that we really have a deep listen to what Georgie has to say. And as a consultant, what someone of living experience that Georgie can bring to the table. Welcome, Georgie.
Thanks so much, Ricky. It's a pleasure being here. Thank you for inviting me to be able to finally be able for the intersex community, the misconceptions and ideologies.
So let's start, Georgie, let's start at the beginning. When did you have an idea of what even intersex meant?
It wasn't until I was 30 years old and I was 24, living in Melbourne, having a very hard time with my family, my father trying to transition and maintain my mental health. I had invasive surgery as a teenager between the ages of 13 and 17. So I had medical intervention on my body. I had operations. They removed my breasts. I had genital procedures against my will, unbeknown to me. So, and of course, no one was told about intersex. The doctors didn't even tell my parents that I was intersex. So I didn't know what was going on. And then I left Melbourne for Teresia's house when I was 24 in the mid-80s, the only transgender refuge service at the time in the whole of Australia. And I went into full transition then, and then thinking that, well, believing that I was a trans woman, and then went through 2 years of psychiatry for gender reassignment at the time. And then when I was accepted for the surgery, they took a whole lot of tests beforehand. And then they called me and told me that I had an anomaly and that I was intersex. And I was 30 years old and I didn't know what that was then. So it took a while, for the doctors to explain what it was about, that I was biologically intersex. And then I did a whole lot of research and then declined the surgery and came back to Melbourne.
So, Georgie, for those of our audience who are listening.
Yeah.
Your perspective, what does intersex mean?
Intersex is a biological term for a person that is of both genders, male and female. We're outside of the binary of male and female, and where our intersex variations are everything in between. So there are many variations of intersex people. My intersex variation is Kleinfeld variation, 47XXY chromosome. So my intersex status wasn't evident until puberty. So then I went through a female puberty, and I didn't have, I had what they called at the time over-testes, which meant I didn't have testes to produce testosterone. And then when my parents found out that I didn't have testes, I was taken to the doctor and induced with, and that was at 13. I was induced with steroids, and I was humiliated by the doctor, prodding and poking my genitals for about a year until they stimulated and they grew, and now I overproduce testosterone, which masculinizes my appearance and body.
So Georgie, going from that experience with the medical profession, and this is something I guess that unless somebody like yourself can really talk about these experiences, why do you feel that the community has little knowledge or understanding? And I want you to, if you can, talk about why we need to understand that the difference between transgender and intersex is important for people who are working in the area of health, need to really understand.
Great question, thank you. Because medically, intersex procedures and surgeries have always been hidden. So it's not, because normally the doctor will intervene at birth with an infant, an intersex person, and they, at the time they used to call it normalizing surgery. So all the surgery and procedures that I had was to normalize my appearance as a male to fit into society, into school. So they made my parents believe that this surgery would normalize and I would be a normal male child, grow up. So my father wouldn't be ashamed of growing up as a mixed gendered child, being intersex. So all the medical interventions that I had between the ages of 13 and 17, I was told nothing. I was coerced. The doctors didn't tell my parents anything. They just put fear into my parents. And my parents didn't even know what they were talking about and just agreed with the surgeries. So at 17, I was just dragged to the hospital by my father because I'd been picked up by the police. I was hanging out in St Kilda, working as a sex worker, trying to survive, getting female hormones off the other trans women and counteracting the male procedures. And then at 17, I was brought home by the police as female. My father freaked out, dragged me straight to St Vincent's Hospital. They stuck a needle in my hand. The next day I woke up with my bandages around my chest. I looked up, not knowing where I was, and then realised, and they had removed my breasts. So I quickly found my clothing and escaped and took off, and then hid out until I was 18 down in St Kilda with friends, until I was the legal age that my father didn't have any rights to.
That's just such a horrific experience, Georgie. And I feel that listening to that, all those early experiences that you've had has made it difficult in having a trusting relationship with the medical profession.
Yes.
Why do you feel that there is so much angst in the community when it comes to understanding intersex variation? And we recently had the ABC documentary that talked about children, especially young people, and like your experiences, the need for what some people, and whether it's the parents or the misinformation that they think that it needs to be corrected
Yes.
as young as possible. Why has there been such a focus on it? And why, I want to hear also from you, why that is a problem thinking, that we need to challenge.
Well, I think for a start, it's political. It starts off political and goes into medical. Politically, they don't want to. They don't want anything outside of the binary, outside of male or female, because that would rock the status quo of political society, right? So, and through religious forms as well, we're looked at. I'm an abomination of being both dual gendered. So there's all these, again, misconceptions through politics, medical and religion to normalize somebody that is born biologically intersex to fit in to either a female or male binary, to normalize them. So we fit into a normal hetero male female society.
How does someone like what you've been through, Georgie, navigate your sense of identity now at where you are today?
Well, from a child, I knew that I was different. I knew that I was female, and that's how I've lived my whole life. It doesn't matter, because I was born a very healthy, normal child. Well, normal. I was born a healthy child as an intersex baby. So there was no need for me to have any invasive surgery whatsoever. But because of politics, medical intervention, and social standards, like once again of the binary, I didn't fit in because I was of both genders. So I've had to navigate my whole life. So what the actual invasive surgery did was actually mess up my biology. And I've had to spend my whole life navigating the medical system and my mental health, because I have to stay on medication now to balance out my hormones, because I overproduce testosterone because of the invasive surgery, and then mental health issues around having my breast removed, that was done, and then trying to repair that. And the medical system, still, I went through Trans Health Pathways about 3 years ago to have reparative surgery to be repaired, not cosmetic, and by the top leading psychiatrist of Victoria at the time, and the surgeon, I was eventually approved. I was being treated as a trans woman because I co-identify as trans intersex growing up. But I was approved for the surgery. I was booked in for the surgery, and then not long after, I get a call saying I was unapproved for it, and I had to go back in. And the psychiatrist said, "Oh, I've spoken to the surgeon, and we've decided that your surgery is unethical." And I said, "Well, what does that mean?" And he said, "Well, your top surgery is female and your bottom surgery is male." And I said, "Congratulations, doctor, that's right." I said, "I am an intersex woman, and this is my biology, and I'm having reparative surgery, not cosmetic. And so, and that's the difference between what I see, transgender and intersex. Trans, you make a choice, it's a personal thing. You feel you need to change genders. That's what it is. That's how we're told, how I see. But with intersex, we are born this way, and there's no way around it. So if you wanted to detransition, you could as a transgender person, but there's no detransitioning being intersex. And at times there's, can be rivalry and that going on within our own community of me thinking that I'm a real woman and blah, 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 because I'm biologically intersex. And that's so not true, because I'm not. I am both genders, male and female, inside and out. So
I think one thing that the one message that I heard quite clearly from just a statement you made, and it's sitting with me, and I'm hoping that those in the community listening who are researchers, and you mentioned that you co-identify as trans. And that, I think, is the first time I've heard somebody use that descriptor. And I think that's important. Can you again elaborate why that is so important, using co-identify?
Definitely. And I actually came to such a huge realization about co-identifying when I first was asked to join IHRA, the Intersex group, to work on the Darlington Statement, because I was the first queen to co-identify as a trans Intersex Fem woman. And I was questioned by the Intersex group as well why I co-identify. And my explanation is that for the first 30 years of my life, I was transgender. That's all we knew. There was never the word intersex, middle sex, nothing ever mentioned until I was 30 at the doctor's. And so I just presumed that I was transgender. And hanging out in St Kilda and hanging out with other trans women, I thought, well, this is it, this is me. Then when they told me I was intersex, my whole reality of life changed, because then a whole lot of things that didn't make sense started to make sense about invasive surgeries and whatever else went on. And so when I went to Sydney to work on the Darlington Statement for a couple of years with the group, the first meeting I went to, I was asked by the intersex group why I co-identified. And because some people had a problem with it, because it's like, you're either trans or you're intersex. And I'm like, well, I'm both, because psychologically and emotionally and mentally and physically, I believed and lived as a trans woman until I was 30. Then when I was told I was intersex as well, I embraced both genders or both identities. I can't leave my trans identity behind. I lived 30 years as a trans woman. So why shouldn't I co-identify? So that was a hard thing for other intersex people to understand as well. So
I think that's so important, Georgie, because for me, listening to this, I'm thinking, okay, even our own unconscious bias, for me as a trans woman, I have to kind of appreciate now more deeply that your experiences are very different from, say, someone like myself, because as you have clearly articulated, the biological conditions to which you, who is Georgie, is so different to how I was conceived, and then my biology. Can you explain to people listening who'd like to further understand that project you're in, this Darlington Statement? What was the Darlington Statement? And we'll put a link for people to look at that.
Yes, thank you. The Darlington Statement is a document that was put together by IHRA, the Intersex Group of Australia, to change the laws around the invasive surgeries that were happening to intersex people from my generation back, and then for the future intersex children that were being born, for those invasive surgeries that they called normalising, to actually stop performing those on infants and babies, children, and let the child grow up to decide for itself what gender it chooses to be, whether or not. And so for me personally, unbeknown until and male beauty induced male beauty. So those 10 years into 17, 18, I was so messed up mentally and emotionally because I was going through two different processes in my body, male and female, and no one could understand why, because everyone was told. And so it wasn't until 30 that I was told that I was intersex that I put together and realised why I started growing breasts and hips and looking female, being female, and why I had male genitals, why I had a penis and not testicles. Like, so you go, what is going on? No one is actually giving me an answer. So until 30, I was just totally confused about, all I knew I was female, and everybody else decided I was other things, especially mental. Because I needed to be normalised as a man, as a male.
And I think that's the key aspect from everything I've read about your work in your life, Georgie, is that the importance of having someone with your living identities to speak from your own perspective rather than having other people speak for you. And that's so important, especially when it comes to research.
Yes, I appreciate that.
Let's now take another aspect I know that you're very passionate about, and you're now a community educator and you're part of the LGBTIQ steering committee for older people for housing for the aged action group in Victoria. Can you tell us a little bit about your role and why it's important for someone like yourself, the difficulties that you have faced for secure and affordable housing?
Yes. It's being co-identifying as trans-intersex, but because of the invasive surgery being masculinized, I am obviously a non-binary femme trans-intersex person. And so I'm obvious. I'm both or neither one or the other. And so it makes it socially, and the system as well doesn't cater for someone like me, especially around housing. So, and that's why I joined the group, to talk about my personal experiences. So the place I'm living in at the moment, my little flat, is private. I tried getting affordable housing through Vincent Care and other services, and I didn't meet the criteria. So, I mean, they tried, but again, there were other priorities of single mothers and their children. So that was understandable to a point, But then, so then I had to go private to find my unit. And I was rejected from a lot of real estates just because of my appearance. And I ended up masculinizing myself enough to present as male to be accepted by the real estates to get my housing.
That must have been an incredibly difficult and traumatizing experience for you, Georgie.
Yes, it was, because the discrimination was obvious. And at times I was actually dismissed by some real estates and realers, like, so it's their personal bias and prejudice against trans intersex women as well. So especially if you're not cis passing. So, and I was lucky enough to meet a lovely young man after months and months of running around and discrimination and mental illness, whatever else, trying to deal with this. And I was nearly homeless where I was living because I had to be out of where I was. And within days, I ended up getting a call from a young man took me in and sympathised with my story and helped me get my unit here. And if it wasn't for him, I probably would have been homeless. Yeah.
So what with your experience, Georgie, what do you hope to achieve in your role with Housing for the Aged Action Group? What needs to change?
The whole system needs to change. Attitude needs to change from real estates and owners. It's housing is not about personal appearance. Housing is about people having a safe place to live, to function, and to be. And it's about equality. It's about we're all human. We all need the same basic fundamentals of life. And the system doesn't cater for that. So because of the discrimination that we cop as non-binary trans intersex women.
What about your experiences with finding work, Georgie? How has that impacted your life? Because you've already mentioned all the invasive surgery that you've had to endure over the years.
Yeah.
And that about in terms of building your employment history, has that do you feel that that's also been a factor that's impacted your ability to obtain affordable and secure housing?
Yes, of course it has. Of course, from a child. It started off with the home, domestic violence at home, discrimination at school as a child, growing up, a femme, pretty boy type. And so it's been a whole life of discrimination to do with across the board and with work as well. I was lucky. I grew up in the Fitzroy Housing Commission and went to the Fitzroy Community Youth Centre and was taken in by a wonderful community there, knowing that I will say I identified as just being queer then, femme male. And I was lucky enough to be supported, and I learned my welfare work through the centre. And they gave me the opportunity to be myself, but still having to present as male because of social standards. And of course, it wasn't until, older age that I started transitioning back to female again and getting work in the field of the LGBTI community, where I've been totally accepted. And that started in Alice Springs about 12 years ago. And so that's the work that I've been doing with our trans intersex community since then until now. And again, quite passionate. And that's why I do the work that I do, because there's many of us from our community that get discriminated against every day, even just walking out the door. let alone, amenities and housing.
Can you tell us a little bit about, I read, and I know we've had a chat before about your experience with also accessing public transport and some of the issues that that you have faced when it comes to just trying to get from point A to point B?
Well, again, it's the same. It's again the same type of bias and discrimination that people take it upon themselves to think they've got the right to have an opinion about my appearance. And so I've been harassed on it. I was violated a few times on public transport years ago, quite badly. And so I stopped using public transport a long time ago and would always have a car and drive to keep safe. But then recently, about a year or so ago, through a girlfriend of mine, I started, and my ex-partner, I started catching the tram again into the city and home to Thornbury. And that, I'm a pretty tough old bitch, but at the same time, I'm like, I have to watch my back. I have to navigate my environment, my surroundings to keep myself safe. I have to watch everybody to see who's homing in on me and who's not. A lot of people won't sit next to me on the tram anyway because of whatever they think they're going to catch or whatever's going to happen to them. So, but again, it's nerve-wracking getting off and on public transport as well. Well, and that's everywhere really for me, because it doesn't matter where I go, I'm obvious. So whether it's the supermarket, public transport, housing, wherever, cafes, socializing. So yeah, it's a life of discrimination.
And I think your living experiences is something that is a day-to-day occurrence, if I'm hearing you correctly.
Yeah.
And I'm just thinking now, for those people who are in university spaces, who are doing research, who would be interested in hearing or speaking and would love to hire you as a peer investigator of living experience within their research, we'll put a link to that to reach out to you, because I feel that there's a lot of knowledge that you have, and your co-identifying intersectional experience will definitely enrich the research community understanding. And I want to thank you today because you have highlighted to myself and to everybody listening, I hope, the importance of co-identification, what an intersex person experience is, and you've differentiated that an intersex person is somebody that is uniquely within themselves, unique difference from transgender.
Yeah, biologically.
Because that misinformation is something that's so important, and highlighting some of the trauma and the medical dominance model of corrective surgery. And I even hate to use that word corrective because that's a misnomer, that it's not corrective.
Oh,
it's
that's
invasive
right.
and
Yeah, it is invasive and there's nothing normal about it.
so thank you so much for spending some time with us today, Georgie. And we're hoping to get you back because I want to next speak our next episode about your work with Transfemme and the importance of what Transfemme does and why the difficulties of trans women, intersex women having relationships and navigating that space of violence and getting access to services. And we look forward to hearing and learning more about your work in that space. Thank you for spending some time on our Voices series today.
Thank you so much, Ricky. I really appreciate you having me on air to be able to speak for our community and create an understanding of what we really realistically have to go through on a daily basis in our lives as well. Thank you.